Lynn Ann Conway, January 2nd, 1938. She was born the same year as my sister, uh, to June 9th, 2024. Lynn Ann Conway was an electrical engineer, computer scientist, and an activist on behalf of transgender people. She died in Jackson, Michigan on Sunday, June 9th, 2024, of heart trouble. Lynn was born in Mount Vernon, New York on January 2nd, 1938. She was a reserved but exceptionally bright student who attended MIT but did not graduate due to a difficult and ultimately unsuccessful gender transition. Conway continued education at Columbia University, where she earned a bachelor's degree and a master's degree in 1962 and 1963 in engineering. In 1964, Conway accepted a position as a researcher at IBM's facility in Yorktown Heights, New York. There, Conway worked with others in an advanced supercomputer project. Conway was fired in 1968 when it became known that she intended to transition. IBM later apologized for that action. That same year, Lynn consulted Dr. Harry Benjamin and became a patient. Brief aside, Dr. Harry Benjamin was himself a pioneer in both heart and spirit, a physician who cared deeply for transgender people, who the standards of care that are worldwide, known as the WPATH standards of care, World Professional Association for Transgender Health. Those used to be known as the Harry S. Benjamin standards of care. Harry was a pioneer, as was Lynn. Became a patient. She completed her gender transition also in 1968. In a divorce, she was denied the right to visit with her minor children. This is not something that's changed a great deal since 1968, I'm afraid. Using her new name, Lynn continued work as a computer research scientist, working at Computer Applications Incorporated, Memorex, and Xerox PARC, and DARPA, the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency.
Government that loves trans scientists.
That invented the internet.
So we go from microchips to internet.
In 1985, she became a professor of electrical engineering and computer science at the University of Michigan and simultaneously associate dean of engineering. Lynn's post-transition accomplishments were foundational in the development of computers. It says develop, but I'm sure it's development of computers. But her pre-transition work was not credited to her until 1998, when a researcher who was I remember this so well. When a researcher who was examining IBM's 3 decades old supercomputer project discovered that a scientist he had been unable to identify had become known as Lynn Conway. For Lynn, this resulted in a difficult decision to come out as transgender. Another aside, from 1968 to 1998, 30 years. In accordance with the then extant Harry S. Benjamin standards of care, you had to go stealth. You had to prove that you could pass. So Lynn was not just a pioneer in computer science and engineering. She was a pioneer in perhaps the opening of the world's eyes to the fact that trans people exist at all. And what she did after this is mind-blowing. And mind you, folks, I'm saying this from the heart because I started my transition in 1998. She has since been hailed not only for her myriad post-transition accomplishments, but for her earlier work. She is famous for, among other things, launching the Meade-Conway VLSI chip design revolution.
Yeah.
Lynn was well known in transgender circles for her accomplishments and for her website, on which she told her personal story, and which she launched in 1998 as a function of her coming out. And in those days, folks, it was all of this was taking place on Usenet news groups. We were having this back and forth. Who is this person? Who is this person? Who is she? Who is she? Who is she? And we found out, on which she told a personal story and worked to advance the rights of transgender people. She's perhaps best known in this regard for her criticism of Ray Blanchard's theory of autogynephilia in a failed lawsuit with Deirdre McCloskey against J. Michael Bailey, author of The Man Who Would Be Queen. the details of which I have forgotten myself, but I remember that back and forth. As I recall, I think that Bailey referred to specific people in that book without their permission. And when you're, I think it was, as I recall, it was a defamation lawsuit wherein Bailey was going after these two women, and I believe, if memory serves, that the lawsuit was dismissed. It was unsuccessful on the basis of the fact that these two women were adjudged to be public figures.
What?
U.S. law being what it is.
How are they public figures?
Because they were, because they happen to be trans and they happen to be talking about their experiences. The way we're all public figures, the way we're all transgender activists, in us being here and talking about our lives, as if we're not supposed to, as if we can get fired and shoved back into a closet with better clothes. As if we can be treated by the likes of Bailey and Blanchard as pawns to use to scare the general public.
Autogynephilia is nonsense.
We can have another whole discourse on that, but I'd like to pay the respects to Lynn.
Yeah, fuck that.
Lynn, in 2002, Lynn married her longtime boyfriend, Charles Rogers. They lived on a 24-acre wooded property in rural Michigan. I'd like to do that in rural Maine, rural Nova Scotia myself, but I'm 70 years old. Nobody's going to marry me. Sandra Salmons, a therapist in Ann Arbor and longtime friend of Lynn's, asked me tonight to share the following information. Lynn Conway died yesterday, June 9th, 2024. Her husband, Charlie Rogers, can be contacted at his address. Arrangements are still incomplete, but Lynn Conway's funeral will be held at Sherwood Funeral Home. Gives the contact information. Service will be at 1 p.m. Saturday, June 22nd, with visitation the night before from 4 to 7. Lynn helped so much. This is Dallas Denny who wrote this obituary. Y'all can Google Dallas Denny, who deserves her own extended commentary. Lynn helped me so much with my first book. There's a photo of her and her husband in it, even. And I had sought her out because she was the most ferocious critic of how trans women were portrayed, and I didn't want to get it wrong. Back then, we lived on two sides. I don't think this is Dallas. I think this is my husband Betty, whose name I've forgotten, much to my chagrin. Helen Boyd. And we'll put a link to this. Back then, we lived on two sides, cross-dressers on one, transsexual women on the other, and we spent months on the phone talking to each other about these worlds. She didn't believe she had anything in common with cross-dressers, as maligned as they were for being fetishist and the like. And at the time, no one really believed cross-dressers or trans women who hadn't yet transitioned. In these conversations, I could hear the light bulb going on when we talked about how a long-suppressed gender identity might manifest in complicated ways for some and in a more direct path for others. It was astounding to hear someone whose brain activity engaged in any detail in order to make a connection, bridge a difference, and her own story. Told me during those calls, helped me understand why the divide even existed. Rest in peace, brilliant friend. You represented the best of us with your incredible intelligence that combined with kindness to create a true icon and role model. I will never even aspire to her scientific genius, but I will always aspire to her generosity of spirit and how much she believed in knowledge, and that knowledge is power. And I'm with Helen on that. Lynn made a tremendous difference in my life, in my being able to believe in myself. As a woman coming out after a lifetime of suppressing who I was in 1998, as she was forced to come out by people delving into the deep records. And believe me, they did delve. I remember they went into, this was kind of a ferreting out of who is this person that did this brilliant work for IBM, and they went into the metadata and into the comments of the code and made the connection between Lynn and her dead named self, who did that brilliant work for IBM, which forced a crisis upon her to come out as a trans person. And then, rather than shying away from it, she embraced it and gave her story to me and for hundreds, if not thousands, of other trans women like me in our 40s, and gave us the courage to be ourselves. And for that, dear Lynn, I thank you.